Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fabulous South Tower of Glasgow Science Centre for this morning's discussion. We have a fantastic panel lined up to talk to you about one of the hottest topics in engineering, manufacturing and business. And we're joined as well by an online audience that I'd like to say a special thank you to. Very glad to have all of you with us this morning. Thank you for joining us. I am Dr. Lynn O'Hare. I'm the Chief Portfolio Officer for the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Our network, established and supported by Innovate UK, comprises 7 centres of research, technology and innovation. And we work each year with thousands of UK manufacturing businesses to help them make significant improvements in performance, in productivity, in output, and ultimately in competitiveness in the global markets that they engage with. And we do that by helping to translate cutting-edge technology, research and innovation out into the commercial sphere and into the products and services that manufacturers offer their customers. So a key part of our role in the high-value manufacturing catapult is looking at future opportunities in manufacturing, and particularly through innovation. And it's really clear that, for many manufacturing businesses, the green energy transition is going to bring around the most significant changes, not just for one generation, but for many generations that we will see as an industry. For example, clean energy systems are going to replace the fuels that, fossil fuels that power our homes, our workplaces, our communities. We're going to require new technologies to be developed, implemented and rapidly deployed to make that happen if we want to make that power systems change. All types of transport are going to change on the ground, in the air and at sea. We're going to see electric vehicles, we're going to see hydrogen vehicles, we're going to see sustainable fuel vehicles, and those have to come on stream at pace in order for the environmental changes that we want as a society to be realised. And we're also going to see such a drive towards net zero from consumers that the carbon cost of producing goods and services is going to be scrutinised as closely as price when people are working out what it is that they're going to buy and what it is that they're going to do and how that has to be made. So it's a time of lots and lots of change, but we think lots and lots of opportunity. Today, to talk about those opportunities driven by the green energy transition, we've got Christine, James, Corey and Daniel. I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves in just a moment, and then I'll be putting some questions to them. If you would like to join in the discussion, which we would strongly encourage you to do, please, we'd love to hear from you, then you can submit your own questions to the panel via Slido. And colleagues will put the instructions for how you file those questions on the screen in just a second so that you can do them. I will do my absolute best to cover the themes from your questions as they come up. And then at the end of the session, we're also going to have an open forum Q&A so that you'll be able to interact directly with the panel. We can share some microphones with you and you can put questions directly to the group. So with that, then, I'd like to ask our colleagues just to introduce yourselves, say a few words about yourselves individually and the organisations that you represent. And I guess, James, we'll start with you as seated closest to hand, please.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn, and hi, everyone. I'm James Hakney. I'm a clean energy lawyer from Maximise. I've worked in and around the clean energy economy, renewables development for the past 10 years. And prior to joining Maximise about a year ago, I was also in-house at ITM Power, which is, some of you may know, is an electrolyser manufacturer, so green hydrogen equipment manufacturer based in Sheffield. I was there for 3 years, during which there was a rapid transformation of the company, so very pertinent to the themes that we're going to be talking about. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Hello, my name is Christine Grant. I am part of the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland. I'm Senior Business Development Manager. I've been with the organisation over 10 years also. And across that time, I have seen our research centre grow. We are set up to be working with manufacturing and engineering industry to help them de-risk and innovate their manufacturing processes, their products, to retain their competitive edge and to support them grow and thrive. We look at that across metal forming, composite manufacturing, data analytics, skills and development, and are looking to understand what industry's challenges are and how we can best support them.
Hi everyone, my name is Corey. I work with a business called Renewable Parts. Been with the business for around 2.5 years. Sorry. We specialise in refurbishing and remanufacturing goods for wind turbines. So we have been around for around 10 years. Originally, we've seen parts going into landfill, going to skips. They were perfectly good for reuse, remanufacture. So over the last 10 to 12 years, we've managed to grow a business around refurbishing and remanufacture, and ultimately pushing to decarbonise the wind turbine industry.
And I'm Daniel Musenga-Grant. I'm the Head of Sustainability and CSR at HVS, which is Hydrogen Vehicle Systems. And we are an emerging UK-based OEM which are producing and developing hydrogen electric HGVs to decarbonise the transport sector.
Thank you. Very nice to meet all of you. So, a lot to discuss this morning, and clearly a variety of sectors and interests. And I think that variety is one of the things we should maybe start to talk about, James. You know, we're in a world where regulatory environment's uncertain, the legislation that covers new technology is uncertain. How do you get insurance for something that's never been done before?
Yeah.
You know, and that must be driving a lot of change for your clients.
It's driving a lot of change. It's also driving a lot of uncertainty, and I think probably what I would say is it could be driving more change. At the moment, the sort of net zero is a very, very simple way of describing something that is hellishly complicated. It's a web of different challenges. And at the moment, it's sort of like we've got a lot of people lined up ready to run a race without being entirely sure in which direction we're going to be running, particularly, you know, from my own experience in hydrogen in particular. There's a lot of technologies out there, there's a lot of potential use cases, but at the moment, everybody seems to agree hydrogen's probably a good idea, but nobody can really agree on exactly how we should be doing that or supporting that. So I think one of the great thing is that we have these kind of clear targets. Net zero 2050 is the sort of the headline in most cases. The challenge is we're being asked to get there without necessarily knowing exactly what the right answer is. I think it's fair to say from net zero, there's not going to be a single winner. There are going to be multiple winners, but there are going to be some losers as well, and there's always that risk of moving first, and we're seeing a lot of people, as I say, to continue the metaphor, standing on the start line, looking at each other, wondering who's going to be the first to go. And we're seeing some clients with the deeper pockets who've been around longer, who can put the money into it, backing certain horses. But at the moment, I think particularly for the sort of SME, there is a little bit of uncertainty, and you don't want to necessarily be hitching your wagon to the wrong horse at the start of the race. I've carried that metaphor on longer than I intended to. But I think, yeah, to sort of, I suppose bringing it back to what we were talking about, yeah, the targets are great, but we would like to see, and the sort of the support for the innovation is there. I do think the real challenge is sort of the final word of what we're talking about today, which is transformation. Yeah. Going from the sort of the small innovative projects that work on the smaller scale to how do we go from a business that is primarily R&D with a good idea to something that is mass manufacturing, the kind of scale that you need to achieve net zero in the time frame that we've got. Yeah. Because although it's great to have a target, it's also another plate to spin, which is the pace of change it just needs to be so much greater than necessarily everybody's ready for.
Yeah, and we're seeing that transition not in one industry at a time, but across all industries. And I think one of the things that certainly I've observed is that scale and pace of change. It can't be done in spite of business. It has to be done where there are good business ideas. And I guess, Corey, if I can come to you, that's where renewable parts started, with an idea that there was a good business opportunity, but regulation is going to change, environmental legislation is going to change. That was something that you guys seized on, really.
Absolutely. 12 years ago when the business was founded, it was a radical idea, putting refurbished parts into a wind turbine, something that would be considered, availability of a wind turbine running is, a very precious thing. So the idea of putting something in that had could be considered subpar to what a new part is was a crazy idea. But over the last 12 years, we've managed to change perceptions. We consider all the parts we do as good as new. So everything that goes into the wind turbine should be as good as the new part. So we are now working with large-scale service providers, OEMs now, to basically change those perspectives. Every day we fight changing those perspectives so that refurbished can be as good as new, and it can also have a positive impact on business. So, for example, lead times can be improved, cost can be improved by doing that, and we can do it completely in the local community as well.
Nice. And that's something that I guess you would hope would have sort of spillover application into other industries as a logic model. You know? I mean, Daniel, your industry is effectively brand new. You know, hydrogen vehicle systems, you're really cutting edge in terms of the development of your product. But you're doing that product development in a world that's maybe not quite ready for you yet, in the same way that renewable parts wasn't quite ready for, their industry wasn't quite ready for manufacturing before. How are you approaching that, and what's important to HVS?
Yeah, so HVS was founded to meet a gap in the market for zero emission HGV. And we ran into some problems early on of all these different areas. There's refueling needed, there's where does the fuel come from, there's getting the public perception of hydrogen, the safety of hydrogen, the legislation. And we ended up going down so many avenues that it stretched us too far as a business. And then around 2020, we refocused and said, we need to produce these vehicles. No one has made a vehicle, a hydrogen electric HGV before. That's a challenge in itself. So we drew our focus in and said, we need to be the best at making these vehicles. And we started to build a team from there. We've done really well over the last 3 years, releasing our demonstrator prototype in April. And we're currently going through our engineering runs to get that to market. And we knew that we had to keep our eye on where's the hydrogen going to come from, where's the refueling infrastructure going to be, but we knew that we couldn't be the ones to do that. And we needed to work with others in the market to achieve that. So it really does take a connected thinking. We can give our expertise, but we know that we need to focus our energy where we're best at. We need to get these vehicles on the road that will start to create demand for the fuel, that will increase the business case for refueling stations, for green hydrogen production. So there's always been a chicken and egg situation that's kind of been with the hydrogen ecosystem. We've overcome that slightly because our strategic investor is EG Group, Eurogarages, and they own thousands of refueling stations across the world. So we've kind of got the refueling and the vehicle under one house. So that helps a bit. But yeah, we need to work with other industries and other sectors to get this off the ground.
Yeah. And I guess at a pace that maybe wasn't, you know, something that people had previously seen in the automotive industry. You don't have the development lead time and the cycle that the established guys do. Is that pace a challenge working in a distributed model? How are you approaching that?
Yeah, the pace is a challenge. You need the best engineers you can get. We tried to set up everything in Scotland. We have had to open our engineering R&D centre in the Midlands of England, because that's where the automotive expertise is, to do that at pace. There's also the need to, the reason that we're doing it is to get displaced diesel vehicles on the road. So that's the real driver for the pace. There's been, back and forth on the legislation around the ban of non-zero emission cars recently. Thankfully, HGVs haven't changed. By 2035, all HGVs under 26 tons need to be, so new ones need to be zero emission. By 2040, all new HGVs need to be zero emission. So we're still working towards that target. HGVs have a lifetime of 7 to 10 years. So if we don't start getting those into the industry now, into the hands of customers early on, we're not going to get the early learning. We're not going to get the early demand for hydrogen, which will drive the refueling stations. But we will also see a much longer legacy of diesel engines still in HGVs up to 2050 if we don't start to get them into the market now and we wait all the way to 2040.
And not insignificant challenges there. I mean, I guess from the business environment through to the the physical challenges. Christine, the National Manufacturing Institute must have its work cut out here. Is it opportunity or challenge we're talking about?
I think they go hand in hand, really. Without challenges, you can't create opportunities to change things. Without that pressure to do something else, then status quo carries on. What we've seen in working with companies already in this area, and that's across quite a broad sort of sectors as well, is that drive towards changing their manufacturing processes, changing their products, and just picking up on Daniel, it's that collaboration which is needed to sort of do that. I don't think it's necessarily one, but it's in consortium building that we can be pulling the right sort of skills and base together. But what we have done within the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland is sort of working across areas with companies from the textile side of things. They're already sort of working on reusable or circular economy, and how we can be working with companies already in that area to reduce their emissions. And the first step for a lot of that is to first understand where are they now, and that sort of then ties into the regulations as well. Like, where are they now with their carbon accounting or their greenhouse gas emissions? Because the only way to, I really feel, to achieve the net zero is to understand where you are, and then to be defining that sort of path towards that net zero place. And that's what we have done as a research centre, working with industry to do that. And that's within the textile side of things. But there's different challenges across the sector. So other projects that we have done more in the shipbuilding, which has its roots in Scotland, and that's been looking at light weighting of the components. So it goes across that whole spectrum of what can you change in the manufacturing process, how can you remove the weight, how can you remove the amount of material that you're putting in. So if you're using less sort of virgin material, then you're reducing your manufacturing impact from your overall business. And if you're reducing the weight, then in the shipbuilding side of things, you have less emissions coming out the other side. So we don't pretend to know everything within ENMIS, but when it comes to manufacturing and technologies, we do see our role in sort of connecting industry up to understanding what their challenges are right now and how we can either signpost and support to build those consortiums and collaborations.
And I guess that's one of the key things, is finding the right partnership, but also finding the right position, if you like, in the innovation and skills ecosystem. I mean, some of the things, Corey, for example, you guys are running an innovation centre in Loch Gilphead. It's not a high population centre there, for those of you that aren't familiar. It's effectively a rural location with high-tech stuff coming out of it. How does your company find and fit into its position in the Scottish ecosystem for innovation?
So it's been a founding principle of the business. It was the founder of the business was from Loch Gilphead, and it grew from there. But it's now became a really important part of what we are, what we do, and our image, I guess, across the industry. There are obviously challenges being in Loch Gilphead and Argyll. It's 2 hours drive from Glasgow, and it's slow, windy roads all the way there. And there's also a very small community there. However, what we've found is we've been able to create a workforce from the local community. We are employing kids from the local schools as apprentices. We're doing work experience, and now we're over 30 people in our workshop over there, which, 2.5 years ago when I started with the business, it was 5 or 6. So we've grown at a massive rate, but it is all local. We also try and source as much locally as we possibly can. And yes, there's logistical challenges, but there is logistical challenges with every business. The fortunate thing about being in the wind industry is that our customers are usually pretty remote as well. So we have a wind farm across the loch from us, so it's not too bad at all. So yes, there are challenges being where we are, but we do see it as a part of our identity, and we do get funding to go with that. For example, we've had a lot of support from Highlands and Islands Enterprise over the years. We do want to keep manufacturing in the remote places in Scotland as well.
And I guess that challenge isn't just about geographic kind of remoteness. I mean, in emerging industries, such as hydrogen vehicles, there's not a big skills talent population to draw, and there's not a lot of pre-qualified hydrogen engineers that you can access. What do you think needs to happen to help your business with that as we grow, and what are you doing to grow the talent you need?
Yeah, when I talk about skills, I kind of look at 3 time scales. So there's the real pressing need to decarbonise transport as soon as we can to prevent further climate change. So there's not much time to retrain people in that. It's one of the reasons that we're, as I said, in the Midlands, we've got a lot of automotive engineering experience down there, so we're able to draw on that quickly. Medium term, there's the potential to reskill people from potentially fossil fuel industries, from in the automotive industry as well, from ICE engines, internal combustion engines. And in the long term, you can start to move into schools. So that could be university level, that could be secondary, could even be down to primary. I know there's an initiative around Scotland of school children making Lego vehicles that are powered by tiny hydrogen fuel cells. So you can start to educate from that level, and over time that will of course feed up into the workforce, and we'll create more people with a connection to hydrogen or experience of it in some form, or even just the knowledge of this is a career path I could take. So yeah, there's the 3 timescales of we need skills now, we need people that can be flexible, can adapt quickly. Medium term, we can get people who are retraining from similar industries, electrical, mechanical engineering. And then, of course, there's all the other aspects of an OEM, of sales, finance. All of these skills are completely transferable. And then long term, it's about just getting more knowledge out there, getting more public knowledge of that, so people can see this as a pathway to a zero-emission career in the automotive sector.
Yep, thank you. And I guess zero emissions careers, come in not just in zero emissions businesses, but in the transfer towards zero emission, whatever your business. And the business support landscape, how people engage with their lawyers, their accountants, that's all got to change as well, James.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's really interesting actually listening to what everybody's saying there and thinking about just how much has changed in that regard. It used to be, if you had a wind turbine, the question was how much power does it generate? And now, as Corey's been saying, you're much more likely to look at the whole cycle of things and be thinking, okay, what is the actual overall carbon impact of this wind farm? We're thinking about blade recycling, we're thinking about parts refurbishment, whereas before, I was sort of smiling because every contract would have a clause in it that says you must use new parts. Whereas now, I think people would be a bit more cognizant of actually, is that the right option? And I think the sort of I talked to begin with about the sort of the absence of, I think strategy is probably the thing that's most important, and that's what plugs into what Daniel was saying about you've got this 7-year lead time or this 7-year life cycle for HDV. So if we don't start now, and businesses need to have kind of the confidence that other parts of the puzzle will be there to fit in. And then Christine talking about kind of textiles and all of the stuff that goes into the supply chain, and complex solutions have complex supply chains, and everything in the supply chain is trying to decarbonize at the same time. So whereas before the legal support was we've got a wind farm here, we've got a solar park here, please can you from a legal perspective, can you check that this works? Can you check that we're going to have a project at the end of this? Now, regulations have changed, which mean that businesses have to do more reporting on carbon, the carbon side of things, which means that there's more supply chain requirements being flown down. That has implications for every business in that supply chain to make sure that their contracts can actually stack up with the projects that they're building. A lot by the nature of a lot of these kind of long lead businesses, where the kind of the products and the profitability is years down the line rather than months down the line, then quite often you're looking at financing structures which are based on being there's a lot of publicly traded companies in the space, which brings its own governance challenges, particularly as you do the rapid scale up. We were talking before about when I was at ITM Power, and there was a period in time when the share price was rising, and what set of regulations we would be subject to on any given day depended on what the share price was that day. Which, as a small legal team that's gone from they went from a company of 70 people to a company of kind of pushing up 400 over the space of 3 years. That's a big challenge, and I think for anyone who was in this morning's keynote, one of the ones that really resonated with me is that technology can't solve people problems. Yeah. And I think getting a large amount of industrial knowledge from the kind of SMEs to the scale up that we need in the time that we scale up, skills and just sector knowledge, that's one of the big challenges that we saw is managing a period of rapid scale up and transition is difficult. because it's not a linear curve of, you know, twice as big company has twice as much administration. They need wholesale new systems, and there's new stuff coming in all the time around supply chain as well.
And not necessarily just in areas where everybody knows what they're supposed to do and how to do it.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, in the same way that the engineering education is going to change, or is changing, the legal education is changing, the accounting education is changing, the financial community has to change. I mean, Christine, we spoke recently about the CoLab initiative at NMIS and how that's bringing data analytics and manufacturing science together to try and feed into some of these questions that might be regulatory or legislative. That's a new program that you've been starting.
So the D3M CoLab is a new data analytics manufacturing 10-week training course. And the idea of it is to bring manufacturing closer to data science. Now, we don't expect all sort of manufacturing or technology engineering companies to be employing data scientists, but we need to get a closer sort of alignment with that, because what we see from the data analytics and what you can drive from the data which is already within manufacturing companies, that can really be supporting the sort of green transformation as well, and it can already be within what's happening within companies. And an example of that was it was in the aerospace sector, and we supported them to data mine all of their production information over a period so that we could improve their actual manufacturing process from a hot forming process to then reduce the temperature, stabilize that. And it was all the information that they had, but they need to be able to access it, understand it, and to be able to make decisions based on that information. So within this training course, we offer that to be starting to bring those two areas together and have that in place.
And I think that's one of those things, is understanding how can you access the information that you have, or the data that you have, and turn it into information. But then how can you use that information to reassure your investment community, or your brand new supply chain, or people to come and work for your company? A big theme that comes out in green energy transition and everything that I've come across has been the sharing of knowledge and information as a really key empowering factor. There's nothing that we've heard today that's about one company, seeking to dominate the world on its own anymore. That's a big change philosophically, maybe from what we've seen from manufacturing businesses in the past, who've traditionally set out to be quite dominant in their individual sectors. So with that, in terms of time, we've certainly, you've answered my questions, panel. What I'd like to do now is give colleagues in the room and online the opportunity to pose their questions to you as well. So I can see that we've had an initial question come in online that I'll put across. So how do we support industry and business innovation towards net zero or green energy whilst balancing the need to reduce pressure on biodiversity and the natural environment? Daniel, can I come to you with that question as a starter?
Yeah, so my role at HBS is Head of Sustainability. One thing I'm trying to do is I have 6 deliverables that I drive into the engineering team, which increase the sustainability of our vehicle in and of itself, not just because it's got a zero emission powertrain. So that involves the materials that go into it, the recyclability of those materials, the waste created, the energy we use in the manufacturing facility. There's one about keeping to databases to avoid toxic materials, and the final one is carbon accounting. So through reducing the climate impact of our HGV, or the embodied carbon in it, that will have an impact on that eventually. Looking at biodiversity itself, we've already got the road infrastructure in place that our vehicle is going to be using. So we have to look at our supply chain. If we are choosing more sustainable supply chain, that should hopefully have a smaller environmental impact. I think where it will mostly come in for our business will be in where do we get our green hydrogen fuel from? That is zero carbon hydrogen. And where will the refueling stations be set up? The refueling stations with hydrogen, it's the same model as petrol and diesel, so you could put them on existing petrol and diesel forecourts. Where we get the fuel from, probably renewable energy. We've got wind turbines in Scotland, so it feeds into the environmental impact assessments of new wind farms, but also how can we refurbish them. And then trying to get as much of that. It's about control in the way that we're producing our energy to get that hydrogen. And working to make sure that we are looking at carbon capture. So we've heard a lot of proponents of blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced in the fossil fuel industry with carbon capture and storage added. So if we are going to go down that route, how are we doing the carbon capture and storage? Are we also looking at rewilding, which could feed into environmental protection? Are we making sure that we're... I think the main thing is looking at how are we producing the hydrogen that feeds into renewable energy generation, and in the environmental impact assessments when we set up new ones, or the great way of refurbishing old ones.
And how that can change. Thank you. And I guess on the biodiversity front and the environmental impact assessment, that used to be, I would say, James, I must do to consent your project, whereas now it feels like that's broadening in scope. It's more attractive to companies to get good scores on those assessments. Do you think the legislation is going to change to start to do things like protect biodiversity and natural environment as well as we develop these systems?
I mean, I certainly hope so. I think we've already seen a bit of a move towards that, particularly in the reporting space. So there's new, new in the kind of legislative sense of the word, reporting requirements for companies that relate to not only what are you doing in terms of your financials. There's a whole heap of other stuff that you now have to consider if you're a company. Your board of directors have to be looking at what is the climate risk, what's the biodiversity risk. And that's coming from the point of view of a recognition that these kind of risks that are long term and depending on your business, they might seem a bit nebulous. There are actual risks that you can see if you look at the news around the kind of biodiversity and flooding and what that can do for your business. So there is I think the attempt at the moment is to sort of build it into the corporate governance and have that as something that's a standing board agenda item to look at what that impact is. And I certainly think, again, a lot of this is going to be market driven. There's going to be a lot of it's going to be supply chain driven. And it's interesting, Lynn, you were saying about how we don't necessarily have the single dominant player coming through in a lot of this. And I'd echo that. I think the trend is actually, for such a big problem, it's interesting to see how localized a lot of the solutions are. Things like microgrids, where you have that local solution, is really, that's basically taking a problem, breaking it down into what do we do in this small community? How do we do this in a way that respects the biodiversity, works for the people that are living there, and also it's almost solving our little corner of net zero, and everybody sort of kind of does their own spots, joins up the microgrids and solves some of the bigger structural problems from the bottom up, which I think is quite unusual.
Yeah, and it's not maybe what we've seen, certainly in the industrial landscape before. Yeah. We've got another question here on that industrial landscape about how do we improve the transition from innovation out to scale delivery. I mean, Corey, you shared with us the sort of 10-year journey that Renewable Parts has been on to date. How have you bridged that gap from great idea into, no, this is a scalable business?
Yeah, so it has been, as I alluded to earlier, it's been perception. As time's gone by, it's the odd part here and there to go into a wind turbine, but we are now working with as I say, service providers, academia, to bring these solutions to market more and more. So one of the projects that Renewable Parts is a founding member of was the Coalition for Wind Industry Circularity, or QUIC as we call it. So we founded this with SSE Renewables and Strathclyde University. The idea was that we would need to come together as an industry to basically make the green supply chain as green as the energy it supports, basically. But we were very aware that individually we had to work together, but that's across the industry, not our 3 areas of expertise. So there's now multiple service providers, OEMs, all a part of this project. And for a small company like ours, it's quite amazing that we've got to the point we're at. But I think the point is that it's no one individual company or academic institution's responsibility to do this, and we need government to get involvement, and without that standardisation across the industry, it's going to be very difficult to do.
So effectively what you're saying is a community-driven scaling. It's not our individual business, it's we as a group are driving that forward, which is again maybe quite different. Some really good questions coming through here. Christine, I'll put to you, if that's okay. So what would the one tip you would give a business to help them maximise the potential opportunities for energy transition be?
One tip.
Yeah. Just one thing. You have to fix all the problems.
So, not to repeat what I said before, but I think the best way to define that net zero path is you first need to be able to quantify where you are now, basically. Because if you don't know where you are now, how do you get there? How big is that journey? Maybe it's not as big as you think, maybe it is. And so that would be my one tip. You need to quantify that. How we quantify that and having that standardised and what that looks like, I'm seeing sort of various things as part of the high value manufacturing catapult. One thing we are looking at is manufacturing energy toolkits. It's a pilot-based program. It's sort of initial sort of funded sort of places for companies. And in part, it is about getting to that point of that carbon accounting, which Daniel's sort of referencing as well, and linking that to the greenhouse gas emissions and how we do that. But how do we set that? How do we create that level playing field so that people count it one way and people count it that way? And what does that look like? But the one tip is first we need to quantify what that is.
Yeah, no, I really like that. You can't start out to get to your destination unless you know where you're starting from. I think that's a really powerful message for manufacturers, but also for support businesses. You know, it's got to be an integrated set of knowledge. So I like this one very much. Corey, specific question for you. Were your customers suspicious of the reliability of refurbished parts at first, and did you have to do anything to address their concerns?
Absolutely. It's something I talk about every day. It's something we're always going to come up against. The best we can do is test the products to a degree that we can prove that they're as good as new. We can provide warranties to highlight they're as good as new. So every part that we put out the door has the same warranty as a new part. So we want to give the customer the confidence, the exact same confidence that they would get from their OEM, that they're getting the same quality of part at the end of the process. What we have also done on top of that is wind turbines are now 20, 30 years old. Most of them we're dealing with as a business are at least 10 years old. We are seeing technology that's now seen as older. We've now advanced from that, so we can now start providing additive manufacturing to the parts we're providing. There's issues they didn't know were issues when they were first manufactured. So as time has gone on, we are now providing products that have improvements in them and should actually last longer than the original part. So there's a huge amount of opportunity in that respect as well. So to go back to the question, we actually want to be seen as good as, or if not better than new.
And then just to pick up on what Corey was saying as well, so some of the technologies that we've been looking at from manufacturing R&D perspective as well is how to extend life of components, how to extend life of tooling and dies for different manufacturing processes. And the same questions get raised as well. So in using different additive manufacturing processes of powder bed fusion or arc welding and whatnot, how do you then check? Because it's one thing to make it look the part, how do you make it be the part that it needs to be? And we're seeing great successes in that of being able to then quantify what the manufacturing process is, but then also what is the properties of that product from essentially remanufacturing it as well.
Yeah, and I guess in sort of civilian terms, you hear a lot about upcycling rather than recycling, and when you get into remanufacturing, there's a little bit more sort of technicality about what it is that you're doing, but that notion that you guys touched on of it's not just replace this with something else that's got lower energy use or lower cost, it's actually replace it with something better, brighter, more capacity, embedded sensors, especially longer term and expensive infrastructure, whether it's offshore, whether it's onshore, whether it's kind of large scale or small. It's expensive. It's there a long time. If we use that opportunity to make changes throughout its life cycle, then we can make a difference. And one of the next questions that I'll maybe start with yourself, James, is about actually which industries are finding that more and less difficult. So the specific question, and I'll let others come in on the first part, about how are AI and other digital tech trends driving transition, particularly with respect to moving away from fossil fuel, and are there some industrial sectors that are just more resistive to that? On that second part, are there some areas where people just don't want to see green energy transition?
Well, I mean, there's one industry in particular that, if you were cynical, you could say perhaps is not the quickest to adopt the green technology. But if I answer possibly the easier part of the question first with the first part, I think in terms of AI, this morning we spoke about AI being a tool in the toolbox, and we're at the beginning when everybody is still working out what exactly that tool can do. There is some really innovative stuff, and this goes back to what you were saying about data as well. Like the value of data particularly in an industry like energy or electricity, where second by second matching is really important for the efficiencies and making sure that you're getting the maximum. You're squeezing as much juice out of the fruit as you can. So AI is something where that process data, like driving something like that. Microgrids wouldn't, a finely balanced microgrid would have been very, very difficult 5-10 years ago. Now the sort of technology is catching up to where we could be, and we're finding that you can actually get these sort of local efficiencies and bridge some of the sort of difficulties. I think the industries that are finding it possibly hardest to transition are the ones that haven't necessarily had to think about it before. I think the easiest ones are your power generation, management of natural resources, where that's always been a concern. I think what we're seeing now, and again, businesses that are perhaps a few rungs down in the supply chain, who are now being told by their customers that they need to be thinking about these things, and they're essentially, going back to my butchered metaphor about running a race, they're now having to run to catch up to where everyone else has sort of got a bit of a head start on that. And I think that's the difficulty. I don't think it's a lack of willingness. I think, fortunately, particularly in Scotland, I think the public support is overwhelmingly in support of these kind of green outcomes. Yeah. I think the difficulty is just getting up to speed with what is a very, very complicated picture if you've not been in an industry that's been doing that.
No, absolutely. And Christine, I guess that's really where you and the team are specialising in, providing that kind of technological business support and workforce development support.
Yes, part of the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland is our Manufacturing Skills Academy as well, where we are looking at reskilling, upskilling and retraining into other areas. We do that across different sort of funded schemes, and are able to also develop the courses tailored to those areas. So where there's a gap in skills, then we're looking to meet that, to fill that gap rather.
Try and develop in parallel. Well, we still have some questions online, but I'm conscious of the time for our session today. All of our panellists are going to be available to some extent for the remainder of the session. So, James, you've got the live lounge in the Clyde Suite with colleagues from Shoesmiths. If you're looking for a session with them, you can turn up and book in. Christine, your team has a stand.
Yes.
And Corey and Daniel, you guys are here for part of the day, and then you're contactable via company websites or social media interactions. We're going to be here for a little while as well. We didn't get the chance to go through sort of questions in from the room, just in terms of timing, but if you would like to ask questions of the panel, please do feel free to come and see us at the end of the session. What I would like to do now, though, is just thank you very much for your time and your engagement in the session that we've had. I'd like to thank the panel. There were some really interesting points and perspectives shared there, and I think for me, it's the fact that green transition is at the heart of the Innovation Summit that we have in Scotland today is significant in and of itself, and I hope that you all very much enjoy the rest of your day here, and thank you again to the panel for your input.